You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The views expressed by the individuals during this broadcast are their own opinions, and they may not be the same as those of their group or other organizations they may be involved with.
All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Hello, and welcome to our V.A.C. Roundtable number 67. Today, we are honored to share our space with one of my respected friends and elders who has been doing this for decades and decades. A true cannabis professional, the hempiest of hempies. I'm even wearing my Ecolution hemp shirt today in honor because he is the author, of course, Hemp Lion Flying to the Future, which was one of the earlier books on cannabis. Of course, Jack Herrera's book was a great periodical, had great pictures, but the story wasn't fully told. And Chris was the one to finally fully vent it and get it out there for people. So it's an honor to share this time with you, Chris. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome Chris Conrad to our V.A.C. Roundtable number 67. We're kind of gonna hit it right out the gate. So this is a multi-tiered question, Chris. So let me explain it. How did you originally come to cannabis? When were you originally turned on? What made you make it your life's work? So, take us through the journey of, oh, this is pretty good, to, well, here we are.
Love to. Well, thanks a lot for bringing me on the program. I've worked with most of you guys on various projects over the years, so I feel like I'm in good company here. I guess, what originally got me started, of course, was I did a research paper in junior high about whether cannabis should be illegal. And I came to the conclusion I didn't really think it should be. And then in the summer of '69, which almost sounds like a cliche, but it's actually true. In the summer of '69, my older brother was in college, and he came home and he started talking to me about marijuana. Well, what do you think about marijuana? I said, I figure it should probably be legal. I don't understand why it's illegal. And so then he says, well, if somebody offers you something, will you try it? And I said, I probably. I mean, I don't know. I didn't really. He said, well, do you want to try some? I've got some. And I'm like, and suddenly I was frozen. It's like, what? And so I said, sure, I'd like to give it a shot. And so a lot of people, the first time they try cannabis, they don't really get high. But for me, my brother, he had 3 joints, and we just kept smoking. And we were listening to a Beatles album, Abbey Road. And side 1, the last song there, we got to the 3rd joint, we're smoking it. And I just said to him, this is the longest song I've ever heard. Is this still the same song? And it turned out it was the same song. And so actually, a little bit more background on me, though. I went to a seminary. I thought I was going to be a Catholic priest. I never expected to get married or to have children. And so the reason I ended up in the seminary, because I felt like as a Catholic, that I was missing something. I knew how important being in church was and God and all this stuff. But when I was in church, I felt like I'm not feeling it the way I should be feeling it. And so I went, from being in the parish to being an altar boy to being one of the top altar boys, and going to the seminary thinking, if I just get close enough, I'm going to really feel something. And then when I smoked that first joint, it's like, I felt something, I mean, I felt like I had moved to a different plane, and that I was observing myself, so to speak, like I was walking along and there was some gnats in the air, and I was like, can I really do that? I'm like reaching towards the gnats, and I'm thinking, wow, my hand, I'm moving, air around me. It was just this whole different experience. And so in a certain way, I felt like I never completely came down from that, because once I had seen the difference between straight and THC activated or have my endocannabinoid system going, I just felt like this is something I was definitely interested in. And so it became kind of a regular thing. And one of my great concerns, APM, was that I was afraid that well, first off, I was notoriously had a bad memory. Like, classic story, I lost my shoes on the way to school. I didn't know where I lost my shoes. It's like, well, I knew when I took them off. So, I mean, I should have known where I lost them. But my mom would always say, you're going to lose your head if it's not attached to you. And so my biggest concern was that I wanted to, I thought if marijuana makes my memory worse, then I cannot smoke it. And so what instead I did was, I enjoyed cannabis so much, I said, well, I got to get my memory in better shape. And so I instead worked on improving my memory. And so anybody who says marijuana is, and maybe some people have memory problems from it, but I know perfectly well my memory is much better now than it was before I ever smoked marijuana, because I made a very significant point of that. And so as I went along, eventually in college, I was writing papers and doing stuff, and it was pretty well known, hanging out with the hippies and so forth, going to anti-war protests, of course. And then I decided that I wanted to do a play. So I wrote a play called Marijuana Comedy of Sorts and produced it at my college. And then when I came out, then after that, I left Maryland and I came to California, where I got involved with other stuff. And things like I was involved with a lot of political issues, but marijuana didn't seem like that important of one to me. First off, mainly because, we were growing in our backyard and most of the people we knew smoked. Under President Carter, the war on marijuana had really slowed down significantly, and we felt pretty good about the situation. And I wasn't really that worried about it. And then in the 80s, we got Reagan's drug war came along, and again, I wasn't that worried about it because I just didn't think it was going to work, and it really didn't work that well until they got to employment job testing, and then a lot of my friends suddenly had to give up weed in order to keep their jobs. And at that point, I thought they might get somewhere with this, That was about 86. And so 87, all of a sudden, the price of weed where I was getting it went from $25 an ounce to $50 an ounce to $100 an ounce. And I said, well, that ain't right. $100 an ounce for weed, impossible. And so I was getting more and more interested in doing something more, rather than just passing. I mean, there were petition drives, and I would sign them and pass out petitions and so forth, but I didn't really focus on this issue until 1988, when George Bush Sr. got elected president. And at that point, what happened for me was that we had a party, and most of the best political activists I knew smoked cannabis, but upstairs in the celebration for our election victories, there people were drinking, but we had to go outside to smoke weed. And so I was out there with the most weed smokingest political activists that I knew. And so I said to them, look, why are we outside smoking pot? We should be inside smoking weed, like they're drinking alcohol and so forth. So I said, this is not fair. Why don't we do something? I think it's time we really, do something about legalizing cannabis. And basically, I was ridiculed. I spent the next, 10 or 15 minutes of people telling me this is impossible. It's never going to happen. You're going to destroy your reputation. I was a well-known activist at the time, quite successful in what I was doing. They said, what's going to happen? You're going to destroy your reputation. Marijuana is going to be illegal for your whole lifetime. There's a lot of more important things to work on. And so, but I said, so there must be some way we could do this, though, don't you think? And everybody said no. And so I just kind of threw out a bet. I said, well, I bet I can figure out a way to legalize marijuana. And again, scoffing, ridicule, etc. And from there, I don't know how much I would have done on it at that point, actually, because it was just one of those conversations. But that Thanksgiving dinner, when I was smoked my joint after dinner with my brother-in-law, his daughter came into the house after we had smoked in the garage. But we still smelled like weed. And so when she walked in, she's like, what's that smell? You guys been smoking marijuana? I was in there today, and they told me about how bad marijuana is. And I said, look, they're trying to get my own family. This is getting personal now. They're coming after my family. And so I talked to her about it, and she said, well, yeah, I guess if after our conversation, she said, so I guess it's not that bad. So why did they ever make it illegal in the first place? And that was a question that really got me going, because I just started reading everything. And the first thing I read were these congressional hearings. And the first thing I noticed was that everybody was talking about hemp, almost nobody was talking about marijuana except for the feds. The businesses were all hemp businesses, and then the American Medical Association comes up and says, well, you're using the wrong word. The real word is cannabis, and the farmers call it hemp, and marijuana is just a made-up word. And the farmers saying, we didn't even know you're talking about hemp until 2 days ago, I think one of them said, in fact. I don't know how I got in a congressional hearing that fast, but that's what he said. But in any case, at that moment, it occurred to me that that was the first answer, was there was a reason they were hiding hemp, and there's a reason they were using the word marijuana instead of hemp and cannabis. So I thought the first thing I'm going to do is bring back the word hemp. And so I started researching everything I could on it. And that led me to several books. The Marijuana Farmers by Jack Frazier wrote.
Frazier, yeah, Frazier.
And then Adams wrote The Marijuana, the First 12,000 Years. And then I stumbled on Jack Here's book. By the time I read Jack's book, I had already formed, I decided I'm going to have a legalization business group. It should be focused on the economy. So I'm going to decide a business group. So I came with Big Business Alliance for Commerce and Hemp, because I wanted to make sure that every time they mentioned the group, they had to say the word hemp to constantly reinforce it. And so I put out all these brochures, the many uses of hemp, 10 things every parent, teacher, and teenager should know about hemp. I formed a corollary group called the Family Council on Drug Awareness. And then we put together the American Hemp Council, which is really kind of a consultational group. We formed groups all over the country, and then it was a feedback loop, all conducted, of course, pre-internet. It was all conducted by telephone and letters and faxes. And so at that point, when I really, then I ran to Jack Here's book. And by that point, I was thinking, I'm doing good with the brochures. I had formed like 49 groups around the country by that point, the first year out. And I had, by a really interesting coincidence, had found the first hemp and the last hemp products that were left, which were some string and some bird seed. And I contacted the companies, the distributors, and I said, I'm interested in your products. And they said, please buy it all. Nobody wants this stuff anymore. And I said, I'm just going to buy some. And I used it, and I encouraged people. I told them where to buy it. And then that became one of the things I did. I focused on letting people know where to get hemp and how to use hemp and what you can make with hemp and how to sell hemp. And I helped market it. And anybody who started a hemp company, I would help them market it. And we were pressing forward. And I felt like the literature was good and the organization was really coming along very well. But I thought we needed a book. And so at that point, I went to a normal fundraiser, and they had copies of the white copy of Jack Here's book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, which is also called Everything You Want to Know About Marijuana But Are Afraid to Ask. And it was more or less almost like a trivia book with a few polemics thrown in. Very hard to follow, but I thought he agreed with my approach, and he had the right information to work with. And so it took me a long time to finally get hold of him. And I said to him, I'd like to redo your book. And he says, no, I don't want to redo my book. I'm just going to print it again the way it was, because it's perfect. And I'm going to do a book about, I want you to help me with a book on mushrooms. I said, mushrooms are interesting, but they're not what I'm working on right now. I'm working on cannabis. And so then he says, oh no, this book is perfect the way it is. And I felt like, it was an okay book, but it wasn't the kind of book that was going to have the impact I was looking for. And so I said to him, okay, Jack, I just write my own book, forget it. And he's like, whoa, no, my book. And so that's how we started on this project of working with him. And I redesigned the book completely. It was designed as a bathroom book, meaning that you could, in the amount of time it takes to have a good crap, you could come up with some information and get worked up about something and know something that you could do about the cannabis reform movement. And it was also designed so that each page can be photocopied and would have complete stories and pictures and everything all tied together. And so that's how I ended up doing The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And then when I went to Europe, then we went to the Hash Marijuana and Hemp Museum, and what they had on the walls was blown up pages out of The Emperor. So I said to him, oh, I designed all that, And when I walked into the museum, it was like basically there was a grow box, there was some pipes, there were these posters on the wall, there was pictures of hash and a sign that said that the government took all of our hash. And so they said, well, how do you like our museum? And, I thought, well, I could just say the usual thing, which is, oh, it's a great museum, but I didn't feel that way. I said, it's a good start, but if it was my museum, I would do something different. And so that's how I ended up working over with the Dronkers over in Holland. And meantime, I thought we needed a different book than The Emperor because I was getting all this feedback. The Emperor is an okay book, but my teachers don't take it seriously. The footnotes, it doesn't look like an academic book. And so I decided I needed to put together my own book after all. So I wrote Hemp Lifeline to the Future and published it. And by that time, I made an agreement to go to Europe to do the Hash Marijuana and Hemp Museum. And so we went to Europe in 90. Actually, we went over in 91. I wrote the book at that point in 92. I went in Holland, agreed to the museum. In 93, I came home, published the book, went back to Europe. And at that point, it occurred to me that it's not a good idea to be in Europe when my book is in America. But the Dronkers, meantime, were translating all this stuff into other languages and so forth. And so it really became a very important part. And then we redesigned the whole museum. And then we came back to the US. Mickey and I met Virginia Resner, and we decided we want to do something else with it. And so we decided to do a human rights project about marijuana prisoners of conscience or consciousness. And but when we met Virginia Resner, her boyfriend was in prison for coke. And so, you know, she didn't just want to do a marijuana project. And so at that point, we said to ourselves, well, you know, human rights are for everybody. They're not just for marijuana smokers. And so we wanted to defend the human rights of all victims of the drug war. And so that's how I ended up going there. But and so, you know, as I say, so I had the hemp movement going. I also started, my original tactic was 3 issues simultaneously: industrial hemp, medical marijuana, and adult use marijuana. And to push on all 3 of them simultaneously, I said, give the government no quarter. We fought on everything. And so we wrote stuff dedicated to bringing on board Christians, dedicated to bringing on Republicans, the most conservative people, etc. We wrote the literature to like cover every group and bring everybody on board, and like no quarter left for the government to hide in. And we just went after bringing out the truth from there on. And so, and it escalated from there.
Yeah, I mean, I have to credit you greatly. Your pamphlets were quintessential to us on the Cannabis Action Network back in, you know, 93, 94, going on the rock and roll tours and having something to pass out to people. Your graphics and the infographics that you had created, I mean, we passed out tens of thousands of those all over the country in hopes that, you know, the kids would forget about them in their pockets and they'd pull them out and their parents would have that discussion with them, you know. So it was, you know, we were using every way of grassroots organizing. And of all the things we did copies of, I'd have to say probably yours were some, if not the top copies we passed out. So that would have been literally hundreds of thousands we passed out. You know,
right. And I'm really glad you brought up Cannabis Action Network, because that was one of the things. I was organizing local groups around the whole country. You know, I had 90 in the second year, and so, you know, it started escalating out from there. But Cannabis Action Network was doing these tours, and so I connected with, I think it was Jody and Debbie Goldsberry. Yep. And then one of the funny things is, so like I was making this medical marijuana stuff, hemp for health, including hemp seed and so forth and so on. And somehow or other, and I was organizing with cancer patients around the country. And somehow or other, LV Musiki got hold of something. And so she called me up and she says, Chris, I want to do something. I'm in the federal IND program, and I think my voice should really be heard. And how do I do that? And I said, LV, I got just the group for you, Cannabis Action Network. They're going all over the country. They have, I think you had a group in Florida at that point too. I said, they even have somebody near you.
Louisiana, Florida, yeah. And she joined us. And
yes, and Louisiana, once she got in there with you guys, there was no stopping her.
And it was no stopping us, because to go around and talk to people about cannabis, there was no better example than, you know, a mother of 2 who was going blind, whips out her tin of 300 joints and then shows them to people. This is what your government is giving me, right? And, you know, when they realized, you know, 12 years of legal fight, etc. I mean, she was unassailable as a person, you know, out there educating in the dark days. I mean, again, blessings. We couldn't have done what we did without her, for sure. Michael Krawitz has a follow-up question.
Thanks, Etienne. Thank you so much for coming on this is really a rather unique roundtable for me personally. It strikes me, there's two things that strike me. One is there's a couple of times in my activism where I felt like, when you're in a car and you go in a car wash and the thing grabs your front wheel of your car and then pulls you through the rest of the car wash. And there's been a couple of times in my activism where I felt like I worked really hard and then all of a sudden I felt like I fell in that kind of groove and it just pulled me in to something much bigger than I had ever imagined and just pulled me right through it really on a singular track. And that seems to be now, as you're laying this out, that seems to be you and your work in a very big way. I went, I guess it was 91, the first time I went to Holland. And then I'd seen, I guess, Ben's initial thing. I didn't even stop in. I just saw it. I got over there mostly out of curiosity because Morley Schaefer did a special on people smoking pot at the coffee shops, and just had to see it for myself on spring break. But I actually went back in 93. I didn't realize it was such a small window to really catch you. I mean, I caught you at the counter of the museum, like it was just a normal thing to find, Chris Conrad at the counter of the museum, but it wasn't. It was a rather special thing. And ask you for information and you handed me a pile of books, the Lifeline and everything to take home. So fantastic. And the second thing I'll say from Veterans Action Council perspective, especially, we're all military vets here and we honor you, we respect you, we thank you for your help and your work and your service to our cause and to our future, our collective future for all of us, even the people we don't like, and have done tireless work to oppose us. And on that, I noticed at one point we were hanging out together at some event, and I'm military. I mean, I worked on bombers, and I'm hanging out with a pacifist, and cannabis is our common ground, and we couldn't be more happy in our work, in our relationship. And I just have to note that.
Well, if you don't mind me throwing something back towards you, Michael, it's kind of amazing that Lennis Worth, of course, was our BAC representative in Virginia. And so, we met her in 91, but somehow we missed you. So I'm just curious, at what point did you actually hook up with her? Because I met you in 93 in Holland, even though I was in Virginia in 91 at the State Fair with Lennis.
Ironically, I met her in the 80s. Before I even got really started because of her connection with Virginia Tech and the auctions and stuff. And we got together on collectibles and antique musical machinery, the radio stuff that her husband was working on. So it's fascinating timing. But one last little, couple of quick questions really about your names of organizations. One, it came up in our discussions. It just seemed like the Hemp Research Council might have been in some way a reaction at that moment to Family Research Council, and if that was a thing. And then the second one was just occurs to me now. I mean, at BAC, was there any attempt to, let's call it in respect to David Borden, our friend from DRCNet Foundation, which I'm not sure when we did our roundtable with him that it came up, but he's a composer, a classical music composer. So in his honor, I asked the question: was there any connection to BAC in the name of BAC?
As a matter of fact, there was. I'll start with that question because when I learned about how much Harry Anslinger hated jazz and felt that classical music was the only legitimate music, the more I felt like I needed to do something to just kind of poke him back and have a force for legalization that was drawn off of that. So it was actually 100%. In fact, at one point it was one of my concepts was the Business Alliance for Manual Manufacturing, or Business Alliance for Hemp Manufacturing, or something like that, BOM. But then I decided no. I wanted to turn it into BAC. I was so close to BAC. So I took that in. And in regard to the first thing you said about the service issue, because I mean, the drug war is a real war. It's not the same as what veterans go through, but for a lot of people, they're getting the same consequences of being pursued with guns, of having post-traumatic stress from what's happened, of losing close friends and family members, which does happen in war too. And so there is a little bit of that. And in a way, that's one of the things that made the wait, let me say something else first, which is that, as I said, I was involved with the anti-war movement, but I understand that a lot of people, veterans, felt like when they came back to the U.S., they were being harassed by the peace movement. And I just want to assure you that, and apologize for anybody who did that. That was the people I knew. We did not do that. We were welcoming veterans back and encouraging them to oppose the war. We were not, harassing veterans. So I hope none of you had those experiences. But if you did, I would like to say, on behalf of the peace movement, most of us were not like that, and we don't like that. But let me get back to the other thing, which is that one of the things that made the medical marijuana issue more personal to me was that my dad was a vet in World War II, fighting Hitler and the Nazis and all that over in Europe. And so he came back with PTSD. There's no question about it. Everyone says he was changed, and he certainly was a pretty weird guy when I knew him and so forth. Without going into that any further, but he was kind of like afraid of cannabis because of the government, and so he tried to self-medicate with alcohol and was not very successful with that. And so when I found out about its importance for PTSD, my original thought was cancer patients were the demographic that would have the most power when it came to medical marijuana legalization. AIDS patients, there still was a stigma. Cancer, almost everybody knew somebody with cancer. So I thought that was going to be one of the major focuses, which it has turned out to be, of course. But the impact of AIDS and the impact of PTSD were things that I only learned about later. And I said part of that was inspired by the fact that my dad, at the end of his life, when he was being treated for cancer at the Veterans Administration, he was afraid to smoke marijuana. He said he wanted to try it, and I smuggled some into him, and he was afraid to try it because he said they'll take my veterans benefits if they find out I smoked marijuana. And so, I just feel like it's such a big tragedy on my own personal life that my dad, who became an alcohol abuser, never had the opportunity to try to use cannabis because of the way the government treated him.
Thank you for sharing that with us. That's a powerful truth, and one, unfortunately, many of us have come to realize, and has also driven our work at the federal and international level, and will continue to. And you'll be flexing on that when we're at the CND there in March for sure. Speaking of, next up will be Council Member Nate Landau with our next question. Council Member.
So, Chris, I want to thank you for being here. Most of our guests I don't know, but you I had the pleasure to meet. You were very welcoming when I just started my advocacy in Contra Costa. We serve the same county, and even after decades of all your hard work, you're still very involved in your community, doing cleanup days, and you're also a very talented singer and a guitar player, and I got the pleasure to hear you perform in March. My question is, what type of research did you do while you were in Europe on cannabis? Thank you.
Thank you, Nate. And yeah, it's great to have somebody else from Contra Costa County here on the call too. I mean, this is we work in the same county here in California, and I really appreciate that the extra energy that you're able to put into it, because I tell you, we need new blood in this movement. It's like the first 30 years or so, you're thinking, I'm going to keep this up, but after 30 some years, I'm starting to think, it's kind of nice to do other stuff. And so I'm really happy to see new blood coming in. Actually, a lot of the research I was doing over in Europe was in three different directions. The first was wandering around looking for cannabis or hemp references in different things like architecture, finding where they have pictures depicting hemp production or hemp leaves or something like that. And finding those kind of things, and looking at museums all over there and identifying the hemp. I noticed that one of the things was that a lot of the things that should have been labeled made of hemp, or at least I believe should have been labeled that, were always labeled with unidentified fiber. And it's like, they would identify all these different fibers, and then all of a sudden there's a fiber they couldn't identify. And it was something that would be like a piece of rope or a piece of cord. So it seemed pretty clear to me that they had basically moved cannabis out of a lot of European stuff too, because you have to remember this is the global war that we're dealing with. This Mike can, as I've talked about a million times, this is not just an American thing, and they've tried to eradicate cannabis culture around the world. So it was really exciting when we go to the museums and find these different things, sometimes labeled, sometimes not, etc. And then when we did the research for the museum in Amsterdam, of course, they had a huge library, and so we were able to go through tons of information to the point where I don't even remember what all we looked at, because when you're like, unless you're writing it, keeping it track somehow or other, it's easy to lose track of how many different books and things like that you wind up going through. And I have to give a big shout out to Alan Dronkers, because he would come in all the time. I was so excited. Yeah. We've got this, here's this book we found, and it's an old reference to hennep or something, and the enthusiasm that the people there had, and everybody coming in sharing their stuff. And by being at the museum, like people like Michael Krause coming in was not that unusual a thing. We have people from all over Europe coming in and saying, oh yeah, there's this museum in Italy which is all about hemp, and there's this exhibit over here, and my region is named after cannabis and from the derivation or whatever. And so to be just so exposed to that, and then to have our literature translated to these different languages meant that people could come and they'd be talking to us about what their research was, and sometimes we didn't even understand each other because they were there because of a translated into Italian or something, and my Italian is just not good enough for conversation. So and then the last thing that's really significant was let me say that last part I was saying, also putting together the collection for the museum. That involved a lot of research and going to Turkey and so forth in order to pick up pieces and stuff like that. That was really exciting, collecting things with Ben Rockers, because he's so serious about it. And then the last thing was that I grew cannabis with CC Bank. And so as far as like having an opportunity to have hands-on cannabis growing experience, I was able to do that, which became extremely important when I was an expert witness, because there was anybody else who grew marijuana would know better than what the DEA was saying about cannabis and what law enforcement was saying. But the difference is that the reason they would know was because they had grown illegally and they would be confessing to a crime, whereas where my experience was completely legal. And so I was able to come in and just shred all these prosecutors, experts, by saying, well, I've actually physically grown cannabis. I've observed, I've worked with the world's best experts, so I'm familiar with the different strains. And that's, of course, things were more simple than they are now to be a top expert on those subjects. But nonetheless, it was critical for my legal work.
And thank you for that legal work, because it is crucial, as well as it's helped saving people, needless to say. Next up will be Council Member Wade Laughter. Council Member Laughter.
Thank you, Etienne. And thank you, Chris, for joining us this afternoon or this evening. As an activist who does a lot of visioning myself about how things should be, this next question really jumped out to me. How much of your cannabis activism is reacting to current events, as versus how much of it was designed or intended really based on how you think things should be or could be? Would you talk about that difference, Chris? Thank you.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and that's kind of a philosophical look at how this all works, because my approach was always to maintain the framework of I had my three goals that I wanted to, and the three goals, as I said, industrial hemp being legal here in the United States and being fully developed, medical marijuana being available with doctor's recommendations, but also I think it's a medicine of first resort, not a medicine of last resort, and should just be available to adults anyway. And the other one, that we needed to have some kind of a regulated business, and based upon age of consent. I was very big on that, the phrase age of consent, and regulated marketplace. but that would have to include homegrown. That's what I said. It's got to include homegrown and personal possession and sharing among friends. That's, you know, that to me, that would be a deal breaker in a certain way. I mean, I don't know what the deal is, so I can't be 1,000% on that. But anyway, the way that I found, though, is something I kind of compared it to. You go the first time that someone made it a pineapple cake, and then as they went to put it onto the plate, it flipped over upside down. And so they came out with pineapple upside down cake. It's like, it's not exactly what you thought it was going to be like, but it's kind of close enough that you can still continue to build on it. And philosophically, there's a huge difference between me and Jack Hare on this one specific point, though. He was an all or nothing at all kind of a guy. You know, he said that he was against everything that wasn't everything. And so I've never felt that way. I felt that what we were doing is we were up against this monolithic wall of which is the drug war, and we were just chipping away at the base, waiting for it to fall down when it would be pulled down by its own weight. And so the whole idea that I would then say, well, this chip I don't want to have, and this chip I don't want to have, seemed unlikely to me. In other words, we need to work on all these different levels at once, and that I know that there's other people like I would say Michael Krauss, what he's done with the international stuff. I mean, I was an earlier person into that, but nonetheless, he's the one who's really achieved, you know, the great benefits of it all, and so forth. And so I've always tried to pass off the work to other people because I want them to feel invested in it. And so that in itself, you're giving up control constantly because, like, and this is where Jack, he would get mad at people because you disagree with one subject. I felt like I wanted to hear why people disagree with me and how do we work together to keep our common agenda moving forward. And so it became very much a matter of looking for the opportunity and seizing it when it came along. Like, if I give a few examples, it's like, you know, with the medical marijuana issue, I really thought we were going to get, because of the Judge decision in 1988, I thought at that time that that was an issue that was going to like start to take care of itself. You know, we introduced LV to the world. We had this court ruling, cancer patients all over the country using it and so forth. I thought that probably doesn't need as much help from me, although I was just organizing patients and putting them in touch with each other. Then Dennis Perone was like, he was going forward with that more than I was. And, you know, working with Dennis Perone was a tough gig, but I would just say one thing that I really want to give him credit for is that he kept down the homeless population on the streets of San Francisco with his approach to his 5-story dispensary, which was the bottom floor, was a place where he provided fruit and tables and chairs for people to sit down and talk. And if they smoked cannabis, far be it. But if you wanted to get into the building and do anything else, you had to have your doctor's recommendation and approval. And so, you know, that's kind of like an unseen part of what he was doing, was helping these people out, who had, giving them dignity and a place to hang out that nobody else has done before since the same level, I don't think. But in any case, you know, I felt like Prop 215 was, I'll say this, Jack Hare thought it was terrible because it wasn't everything. I argued, no, it's a third of what we want. And it does have some problems. Like, it doesn't say anything about how you can, it doesn't say you have a right to obtain marijuana from somebody, which would then imply a right from some other people to give it to you or something. It's too restrictive in terms of the patient and caregiver thing, you know, and it, anyway, those are the two main things that I felt, you know, I was big problems with it. But nonetheless, when the momentum came up, that became where we saw having our first big victory, I jumped straight into that, you know. In fact, the whole thing was foundering because of personality conflicts within the medical marijuana community there. But because I came in from a different position of hemp medical marijuana and adult use and legalization forces all bring adding into this effort, which Dennis thought was supposed to be the pure patient-only driven thing. We were able to push it over the top. And again, Cannabis Action Network, bless your hearts on that. We brought people in from all over the place. But then when we got into the actual initiative itself, those restrictions that I said really came up fast, and the prosecutors really pounded away on them. And so as an expert, I was constantly having to make arguments about these, what is a reasonable amount for a patient to have. And some of the patients had some, I would say, unreasonable amounts, because in the fact of the matter, they were providing to other patients, you know. And so we had to kind of pretend like there was everyone just using this off of themselves, even though we knew perfectly well that they weren't. We had to just present the evidence that there was no evidence otherwise, you know. And so so they would often say, well, it's the amount of marijuana shows that it's criminal. And so we got into said, well, the federal government gives people 6 pounds at a time. So the first 6 pounds should be just considered a medical basis, you know. After that, then we have to talk about other ways of consuming it and so forth, and pushing it into all these different other areas, and creating this idea of how much it really requires and coming up with a formula. And so I took the federal government's own information, made it into a formula, which we called the Safe Access Now formula. We said, look, federal patients get 6 pounds a year. It's reasonable to say that that's probably, those guys are sicker than most people, but it's also reasonable to say that half of that amount is fair assessment of what another person might need. And so we were arguing for at the 3 pounds being adopted as a standard around the state. That we ran into some problems because the state legislature started making changes. And one of those changes eventually became Senate Bill 420. And again, when Senate Bill 420 came along, we were working with Americans for Safe Access, and various, you know, NORML's always involved in all this stuff too. I mean, I don't want to name all the groups because there's just too many. But there's Senate Bill 420. Again, Jack Herter was against it because it said a safe harbor amount instead of saying people could have any amount. And so I had the problem that they made the safe harbor amount 6 plants or 12 starts and 8 ounces. And so they really dropped that number so much that people like Steve Covey then came out against it, you know. And so we were trying to get it passed, but it also included the collectives. And so, you know, to me, I was willing to accept almost anything to get those collectives that said patients can provide to each other, because that opens up a whole new massive amount of legal arguments that we'll be able to use in court. And so, you know, so at the last minute, when I saw that change, it's funny because we went in the morning, they said it's going to be 6 pounds and 200 square feet. And then when we arrived, it said 12 plants and 8 ounces. And so we started off the day telling people, look, vote to hold this and fix that, put that number back where we wanted it, and so forth. And then at lunch, we met with the assembly member who produced the bill and said to him, you know, look, you know, we're telling people to hold off on and vote against this and to hold it until we can get those numbers back. And he says, well, if they do that, I'm going to kill it. I'll pull the bill. He said, and I'm done, because he said, I've been, you know, my whole career, I've been working on this, getting this thing in here. And this is you know, the way it is that's going to the vote today. And so we're like, oh, well. And so then in the afternoon, we spent lobbying to pass it again. So yeah, if you can change within the course of a day, you might have to change what you're doing in terms of tactics.
You brought up, of course, Jack Herrera's all or nothing approach, which of course was, you know, he was the early darling of many of us in the sense of going around motivating, really pushing the issues. And I think it was that his all or nothing that showed us there were other ways to find cracks in the wall of the system, right? Because, you know, many of us had done unsuccessful the initiatives, and his initiatives were tens of pages. And then you have 53 different counties in, in California. That becomes quite a wieldy discussion to carry around with people, needless to say, that, people just couldn't get past page one. And it was the simplicity of, it's kind of the double-edged sword that was Prop 215, because its simplicity was a one pager, and the confusion then was no longer there. And that once that crack in the ceiling happened, it shattered everything. And we saw also Dennis be elevated because of that, because he really got that national, international success that, of course, then spread throughout the world. So it's a fascinating time, and the people, and as you speak towards the egos, I have great respect for you, because you were one to definitely navigate those waters, because they were so, they could be very challenging to deal with, right? You stated earlier how Dennis is challenging, and Jack even, I think, was more challenging to deal with. But it was a factioning of, you had Dennis in Northern California and Jack in Southern California. And California was viewed as the, the mega place for cannabis. And to have these two titans of cannabis ego, how was it navigating those waters?
It was tricky, but Mickey made it a lot easier, because she brought some feminine energy into it, whereas it was kind of like if I dare say, a pissing contest where guys are like out there they want to be the most, how many, we call it the cannabis Rex syndrome, that people consider themselves the king of cannabis in some. And often you use that expression describing themselves and things like that. And could you rephrase what exactly it is you wanted?
Just how was it navigating those waters? Because those were two very strong egos. With Jack had inspired you via the Emperor, and of course Dennis had his own intellect, as well as both were veterans, what I'm saying? So I mean, we both hold them in high regard, but you had to work closely with both of them to achieve. And that, I watched many an activist fall to the wayside, give up just in frustration in dealing with them. So I get that, your partner Mickey, she helped soften and bring in that feminine energy, but
thank
you
you.
Also intellectually navigated those waters to help work with Dennis on 215 and various, other ways. So you were really right there in the midst of it all, always kind of either inside or just on the outside of the perimeter.
And all over the country on other projects too at the same time. And basically, you have to put up with them being mad at you and for a long time, maybe even, because like Dennis, he became the anti-legalization person in California. He was the main anti-legalizer on. He's like, oh, well, medical is good enough, but it wasn't good enough. And the cops could always bust you and say it wasn't medical, no matter how medical it was. So, that whole notion became a problem. And where we really saw this, and it goes back to what I was saying to Nate about bringing in new blood, was Richard Lee in Amsterdam. Because what you're talking about, ATN, really came to its culmination in 2010 when he decided he was going to put legalization on the ballot in California. He had the money to pay for a petition drive, and he asked other people to put in matching money if they could, but put in some money and have a say in how it would be written. Otherwise, he would just write what he thought it should be. And so that kind of led to people like Dennis then saying, no, we don't need anything. I'm against it because we don't need anything. And Jack saying, well, it's not everything, so therefore I have to be against it because it's not everything. And Normal and other groups saying, well, it's just the wrong year, and so nobody would put in any money. And Richard wound up having to finance the whole thing himself, and then was brutally attacked by people organized by Dennis Peron to harass the Proposition 19 campaign in Northern California and Southern California. And then Jack attacking us. The difference between Jack and Dennis, though, in this regard, was that with Jack, it's like he was against Prop 215. Then when he could get paid to get signatures for it, he became for it. And then when it got passed, he took credit for it. But he was against SB 420. But then once he saw the collectives, he liked the collectives, so he was for it. And against Steve Covey is another way. They thought he's for these things now, but he was against. But now that he sees that what they're for, and then that's probably thinking that they're the ones who came up with the ideas and so forth. And so when Richard Lee came in, he had his own vision. His vision was to bring Amsterdam to Oakland. The name Oaksterdam came out. He and I put together a newspaper with Jaime called the Oaksterdam News. We became the main source of news about cannabis, really, a free newspaper. We were around the state, but also around other parts of the country, too. This is where people were, again, pre-internet and so forth, or at least the internet was in its youth or infancy even, compared to what it is now. And so we were then, and in between those two things, of his forming Oaksterdam and putting Prop 19 on the ballot, we had the Oaksterdam University, which said, well, it was playing on the economics that I had originally projected, and why we got the Hemp Industries Association started in '94, and why Aaron Smith put together the National Cannabis Industries Association, because of the idea that we needed to have really or get the financial side of it straightened out in order to get the criminal gangs out of it. Now you got to remember, people have this like romantic idea about, oh, it was illegal. What happened is we had these growers up in the hills, and they were all courageous, and they were selling it, and they were, rescuing sick and dying people. And yeah, there was some of that, but there was also Mexican gangs that were involved with, mass killings and so forth, getting marijuana around over the border and things like that, and the street gangs who were heavily involved with it and so forth, and people getting long-term prison sentences, and people getting killed or disappearing up in the mountains out making marijuana deals. And it's like, a lot of people, if you didn't personally get busted, you thought nobody got busted. But in the fact of the matter, I was working in the courts. I worked on more than about 3,000 cases by now. And most of those were, when marijuana was supposedly legal in some way or form, that these people were involved with it. And so, I think this is and the problem is that the media likes to glom onto this and say, oh, like there was a killing in Oakland, a cop trying to stop a robbery at a cannabis business. Is it more dangerous now than it used to be? It's like, what the heck kind of a stupid question is that? Cops get killed stopping robberies all over the place. You know what I mean? It's not unique. This is likely to happen at a restaurant as it is at a cannabis store. Statistically, more likely at a restaurant. And so, I can't really afford to fall into this romanticization of the outlaw period, even though, frankly, I have also a very romantic experience of it. Traveling around the world, smoking marijuana illegally, people getting trying to get me the best marijuana they can, and things like that. And the outlaw culture that we had, the sense of camaraderie, there were a lot of the Grateful Dead scene, I think, kind of sprung out of that kind of a thing. 420 coming around as a spontaneous creation. So there's always another group that's going to come in after us, and we've seen I thought this was my original idea was I had a 5-year plan that was going to like trigger this legalization, and then all these other people would get involved, and I would not be particularly needed. If it took more than 5 years, I didn't necessarily need to do it. I was going to be in Europe living a European life. But what I've found instead is this is a multi-generational thing. And we're really fortunate that within our lifetime, we've seen as much change on this issue as we have. Historically, movements like ours don't succeed as well as we have. But it is a slow process. And the first thing that happened for me was I thought, well, I can go to Europe, and we had like all these businesses starting. We had groups all over the country. We had the unified message. We had groups making tours. We had legislation. We got bills passed in New York and Colorado. We had, the whole medical marijuana thing getting out in the media with sympathy. I thought, well, I can go to Europe and disappear, and that'd be fine. Of course, as it worked out, when I came back to work on to get the book going, I found out there was so much fractionalization going on, and it was unbelievable. And so, in a sense, that was one of the things that I think that Mickey and I as a team were able to achieve. Is first off, we were a couple, so we could cover both of the sides of misogyny or whatever, but also we travel around the country. We did the speeches and the rallies, but we also did little meetings with small groups of people, talking to them about what it is that brought them into the movement, and how they thought we needed to move forward, and what they were willing to do to make that happen. And so, it wasn't reliant upon a few big personalities. They thought it was, but it wasn't. It was designed from the beginning to be spread around the whole country with hundreds or thousands of groups, locally organized on a local issue that was connected to 1 of 3 issues, so that we constantly build upon itself. And so I think that was really part of it, was that we didn't really, as a movement, I think we were one of the first ones to bring women forward, the first political movements that wasn't a women's type of a movement, to really have women showing up. And I think that Mickey and I were able to actually help that happen. You had Debbie Goldsberry, and she was, for a long time, she didn't like to speak and so forth. And so she would be there doing the background work. But meanwhile, it would be Jack and Keith and on and on, name the names of all the guys, including Ed Rosenthal, who would be like, out there, like, arguing about all these different things. But it was the women who were manning the table, the women who were helping hand out the literature, the women who were organizing it and publicizing it, and things like that. And so because Mickey was hanging back too, and I didn't want her to do that. So I would constantly bring her in, and when we were with groups of people that were trying to talk over her or other women, I always made a point of saying, well, wait a minute, I want to hear what she has to say, and giving women credit for what they were doing. And I'm not trying to say any of the things I said I did, I'm not trying to take whole credit for, obviously. A lot of people, it was like in the air. It was, the times were such that a lot of people, you just find people who the right person would suddenly show up at the right time, and things like that. And so by always having new people coming in to balance out that old energy, I think that's the key to navigating. It's like make the waves so that there's eventually enough of a wave that it kind of made a flat surface.
And great respect to you, because yes, you have led by humble example, and I definitely would give you credit for definitely pushing against the toxic masculinity that had definitely existed for rampantly throughout the a lot of the movement. But great credit to Debbie and Mickey, because it took a lot of the women to work behind the scenes to make us be ready for whatever we had to speak on and touch. And that's what forced me into speaking, is because Debbie didn't like to speak. So she's like, you go speak.
But she still doesn't really speak that much. Yeah.
No, and that's,
But it's interesting to see her now we're doing the business side of it, considering that my concept of her has always been so grassroots.
correct. And that was a shift for myself to go from the grassroots to going, but mine came via hemp and ecolution, and then into the medical cannabis. So I was able to get a broad spectrum of understanding of the various intricacies of the levels of each, right? Because a memory for me is back in like 94 at the Mateel Center, and we were doing some event, and you were there, and we were talking, and some person came up and was like, "Oh, kid, it'll never happen in your lifetime, give it up." And you piped up and said something like, "No, it's quite possible," and you started talking, and it was like, and I always credit and remember that moment, because especially now in these moments when what they said never would happen in our lifetime now exists in 40 plus states and 24 legal states, and how many now countries, etc. It's times like those that warm my heart, because those are pivotal times when it was, as you stated, it's still one-on-one, it's still done person to person, it's still done human to human, and we've been able to get out there and have those connections. And mad respect for all of what you have been able to achieve, but also how you have built yourself on them, and continue to not only educate yourself, but you push that education out, which would of course affected us and can in various ways and levels, which helped us spread the word internationally. So the ripples that you have helped set in motion are why we are here today, and also why some of our younger members are learning and absorbing, and why we have these roundtable discussions, is because a lot of the history was not written, wasn't documented, because it wasn't history. There was no Wikipedia. And there was handfuls of us that are still around that actually were fortunate to live through these moments in time and to see the tectonic shifts. And there was no grand plan, which some people, I hear rumors of people talking like, you have no idea how we piecemeal this shit together, but we did. And that's because of determined leaders and educators like yourself that never rested on your laurels. You never felt comfortable about it. You still don't. You're still educating and finding your own level, if it's now in spirituality and various other avenues. As you have become enlightened, you constantly turn it over into enlightening others, and that's a special gift that not many people have, and that's a credit to your good communication and great communication skills. So
can I just toss in another quick thing, though? Is that first off, for me, there definitely was a grand plan. I wrote down in 1988 the Business Alliance for Commerce and Hemp, 3 issues, and here's how we're doing it. In fact, I had a map of the country and a list of different demographic groups that we had to convince to do it, and invitations for people to do it. And I sent them how to organize a meeting. I sent them a sign that they could just fill in the details, to make it all so unified in terms of the vision. So I understand what you're saying. Actually, is that we were bouncing off the walls to try to get the ball down to the hoop or whatever, but it was a combination of that. What I really wanted to get to, though, is that somebody else who I think really deserves a lot of credit is Don Duncan. In terms of counterbalancing some of the other energy that was out there in our area, and the work with the BPG did and so forth is just like that whole cluster of people out here, that to be in an area like that where there's so much support, it's hard to let other people's bad attitudes get you down when you've got so many great people that you like to work with, and I'm including a lot of people on this program.
It's been an honor to witness it. As I said, I kind of always feel like the Forrest Gump in the cannabis movement. I'm kind of in the right place at the right time with the right people, and it's been a joy, needless to say. So
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net. Limestone City Hydroponics is Kingston, Ontario's hydroponics shop. Take your growing to the next level and create the optimal environment with a tent kit, or maximize your yield with an ebb and flow flood table kit. Either way, Limestone City Hydroponics has more sizes and options to fit your needs. Are you looking for the power of the sun that adapts to your budget? Then look no further, as they have professional grow lighting. They have indoor grow systems that are easy and cost effective, with many options to fit your living space and lifestyle. Cultivate your growing potential. We have everything you need to succeed. And if you can't make it to the store, they offer local delivery to the greater Kingston area. Remember, when you're looking for experts to help you grow, then look no further than the locally owned Limestone City Hydroponics, 105 Sunderland Drive in Kingston, Ontario. Call them at 613-548-0420.
Are you looking to get your medical cannabis grow license? Limestone City Hydroponics can help patients through the process of obtaining their license to grow medical cannabis. What's that? You don't have a doctor. If you meet the medical criteria, Limestone City Hydroponics has a nurse practitioner who can assess and provide medical cannabis prescriptions. What are you waiting for? Contact Limestone City Hydroponics at limestonecityhydroponics.ca or call them at 613-548-0420.
What do you find at paceradio.net? People advocating cannabis education.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Cannabis edibles are an effective way to manage pain and other ailments, especially when you deal with your trusted partner, Legacy 420, in Tyendinaga Mohawk territory. You see, we lab test every product on site to ensure proper dosage every time, which is critical when consuming cannabis edibles. All Legacy 420 edibles are made by our classically trained baker and chocolatier, and we also have super tasty vegan options.
Our baker has been in the industry for 25 years. She's also a chocolatier. Everything from savory to sweet, your chocolate bars, brownies, butter tarts, you name it, we make it.
Talk to our knowledgeable Cannatex about our incredible variety available. Give your trusted partners a call. Legacy 420 out on your road.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
Well, let's carry on with our discussion. Peggy Jones, our next council member, has our next question.
Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My question is, what industries do you see that could benefit greatly from hemp that still need to be utilized?
Well, you know, most of the basic fiber crops is what really needs to be utilized. That's been my greatest disappointment, frankly. We started, I mean, you know, we under our campaign, we got legislation in Canada. I mean, not that, again, I'm not taking credit for all this, that we're like working with groups and doing all these things, of course. But by '94, we already had a bill passed in Canada and one in Colorado, allowing for research into hemp. And I always felt like I have so much confidence in hemp, you know, once you get the door open, it's going to go all the way and so forth. But we knew right from that, even before that what we need to do is get the infrastructure in place for the textiles and fibers and fabrication. I think fabrication is probably a better word, because you can include hempcrete into that, which doesn't require nearly as much infrastructure. But unfortunately, what we saw happen was that the cannabinoids market, starting with the CBD market, became so much more profitable than fiber hemp that it kind of choked off the development of the infrastructure, because people had an easy way to make money, which is CBD, or they could put in the hard work and for a long-term fabrication industry that would be beneficial to all society, from the farmer to the manufacturer, to the transportation, to the consumer, to the investor, to the retailer, to the employees throughout this whole thing. Having that kind of a thing, it takes a lot of work. You got to give credit to somebody like Larry from you guys know what I'm talking about. Somebody want to throw in there. I'm embarrassed. But anyway, so Larry Serban, there we go. That he's actually like getting farmers to grow hemp and looking for domestic sourcing and so forth. For the fiber, the seeds came along and they were pretty. They have a big market that can continue to expand. But it's the fiber market that's going to make a big difference in terms of improving the environment. And that's really what we need to get going the most, I think, if you have to single out one area. And like hempcrete being an important one. And it just drives me crazy that here we are in California. We've had droughts, we've had floods, we have extreme temperatures and so forth. And hempcrete is like a solution to so much of that stuff. It's fireproof. It's lightweight, relatively earthquake proof, insulative, all these different things. And, we have this big homeless crisis and so forth. And yet we haven't like managed to put those things together in a way that it's almost like what we need as a country or in different states is like somebody who's like a oversight to guide the development of hemp, because the way it's going now, people pursuing what's the fastest way to make money is not the way we're going to build this kind of sustainability that we need. And so, yeah, that's unfortunately that's where I see the most need.
And I completely agree with you. As an old hempie myself, and seeing how the commercialization and the commodification of these hemp extracts has been a waste of time and energy that we didn't and we cannot afford, needless to say. Next question will be from Council Member Al Byrne. Council Member.
Chris, nice to see you again. Nice to talk. Before we go any further, please remember me fondly to Mickey.
Oh, thank you. I'll make sure I do that.
Yeah, no, she's a wonderful woman. Look, I'm gonna because I'm as old as you are, maybe older. I'm gonna take the time to just make a few comments, if I may, about your testimony here tonight. First off, you started saying not everybody gets high the first time they use cannabis. Thank you. I put that in my book because I think that's something people don't realize. A lot of people that don't understand the issue just think, oh boy, you take a hit of this stuff and you're in another planet. Not the case. So thank you for bringing that up. Well, veterans, Jack Herr was an Army vet, and Dennis was Air Force. And Dennis was a particular cohort of mine because we both served in Vietnam. He was there a little before me, but nevertheless, we were there together in our own sense of the word. And I found them, I worked with both of them for years. And I found them easy to get along with. Both of them, me, and I think the connection might have been the veteran connection. We do have veterans that are listening to this program. Understand we have our own sense of connection, and once we make it, the trust level is pretty friggin' high. And both of these guys, at the time, I was also working as a counselor for the Agent Orange program, and these guys gave me some rather personal, stories that was for me to die with, and I will. But I don't want the audience to think these guys were irascible men and hard to get along with. Anything but. They were personable, loving guys, and both of them only wanted the best for everybody. I mean, that was their thing. But let me stay on the vet thing. You brought it up. Thank you. And thank you for not harassing our ex. But again, I worked for the Agent Orange Commission for 5 years as a counselor, and our focus was entirely in Vietnam veterans. The guys I worked with were all either in North Carolina, Virginia, a little bit of West Virginia. And they were all harassed, including myself, in some fashion or other, whether it was in an airport or passing through on a bus somewhere, or when you got home, you couldn't have a job, or people in your town started calling you names behind your back. It was a vicious, horrible time for veterans in the United States of this country. And as I understand it, 85 and 90% of you living here in this country right now have no recollection of what I'm talking about at all. That's why I want, if somebody's listening, to recall it. It was a terrible time. And I want to pat the back on the bomb vets. They took it, just like they took now. Most of us didn't want to go there. Wasn't our fucking idea. We're just soldiers. And we do what we told the best way we could do it. Same like everybody on this show that's a vet. Just do what you do. And so we did what we did, but when we came back and weren't rewarded, probably the first soldiers that ever came home since the time of Julius Caesar, we said something. We said, never again. I don't want to carry this out too long. But the reason that veterans are welcomed home now, and they should be, is because Vietnam says never again. You're never going to treat a warrior of this country like that again. And this country listened this time. So I thank the country and I thank the vets that stood up. That's enough of that. Women.
Well, one thing though, I want to thank you for bringing that up, because yeah, these guys, they were great guys. I mean, we had fantastic times. I have a million wonderful stories about working with them.
Well, yeah,
the tactical thing is where we were rubbing against each other over tactics. And that's
and we've talked about this on the show. I mean, these guys were all talking about that. Well, a lot of the leaders of this whole cannabis issue were all veterans. ETN, Mike, me, Jack, I mean, go on and on and on. So the veteran community in the cannabis legalization, hemp and medical is enormous. It is really has been the overall leadership. And women, you brought up women, good point. They've always been a weak point in our overall issue to get women involved in the health benefits of cannabis, especially. And I would add, Chris, to your list of hemp, the nutritional value of the hemp seed and how much that nutritional value can help women, men, everybody else. But again, I want to call out a few women. We've already talked about Elvie Masika. I mean, my word, Corinne Millette, a woman nobody remembers, but she was one of the first federal patients that spoke out, lost part of her eyesight. The government withdrew cannabis from her. She lost part of her eyesight for speaking out. A hero. Of course, my ex-wife, Mary Lynn. We have doctors like Melanie Dreyer, PhD, risking her career, her reputation, which did not fail at all. But these were women that really stood out. So I just want to say, women have been there. Dosage. Yeah, you were pretty much right on, Chris, in looking at those high dosage. I think you're absolutely right. Again, we mentioned Irv, the last remaining federal patient that gets his cannabis from the federal government. Irv's dose, folks, pay attention, from the federal government is 11 cured ounces every 3 weeks. Add that up. So when these lawyers in Kansas or Louisiana or Oregon are trying to decide what the dose is for a patient, I would recommend the minimum would be whatever the federal patients have gotten. And even the women, like I mentioned, like Corinne, Elvie, they were up at 8, 9 ounces a month. But Irv's 11 ounces every 3 weeks. So the dose thing is to be considered. And I just want to tell you, Chris, if you 2 things, that our dads were both vets. They both died of cancer. My father had the opportunity to try cannabis before he died, and it helped him. It was a short-term thing, but it did. And I'm sorry your father didn't have the opportunity or didn't take the chance that my father did, but it helped him. And I also want you to know, and the folks here listening, that you're in my book. You're mentioned very favorably a couple of different times. So if you really want some insight on Chris Conrad, you got to read For Country and Cannabis. I have a question, and here it is. You know it, and I don't understand the question. I didn't write it. I drew it. What makes cannabis legally considered medical? I got to go back to your friend and mine, Dennis Brown. Dennis just said right out, every use of cannabis is medical. And I'll ask you your opinion. What do you think, dude?
I think it's a nice catchphrase, but I don't agree with it. And it always seemed weird to me that Dennis Perone, who's credited as the author of Prop 215, which defines medical marijuana as marijuana used with the doctor's recommendation or approval, would then say that all use is medical, because he actually wrote the law that said you have to follow, it's a legal issue of what is medical and what is not. And so that led to the Conant decision, and all these different major steps forward from there. But I mean, to me, I think that's an oversimplification, because a lot of it is medical, especially heavy use is oftentimes medical. But for me, I use it for fun, and I use it for spiritual reasons, and I use it because I feel like it enhances my abilities, and and in terms of assessing things, like anything I write, I like to look at straight and also look at it when I'm high, because both of those gives me a perspective on how the message is being shaped and so forth. And and to that point, I would like to get back to the Alliance for Cannabis Therapeutics and the work that was done with Patients Out of Time, because the reframing, I shouldn't say that, the using the medical community to define cannabis instead of letting law enforcement define it, your organization and those conferences was instrumental in that, in expanding it. And the problem with the way that it's set up now is oftentimes a matter of semantics. Like the DEA say that it's always a mistake to have police in charge of medicine. I think it should be doctors in charge of medicine and not police, or at least something vaguely related to health. You might say doctors you have their issues too, but nonetheless, not the same as law enforcement has. And so the way the federal and the state laws have set it up, it becomes a law enforcement issue because of the drug schedules. And cannabis is, even in all the states with medical marijuana, none of them has taken marijuana out of the controlled substances list. And it's a very simple thing to do. You say, change line, whatever it is in California, it's the line 13 of the code, from saying marijuana to saying this space deliberately left blank. And that's all you have to do to get it out of there. You don't have to renumber everything and go through. You just kind of do the space holder in that place and get rid of it. And yet, for some reason, no state legislatures have done that. We considered doing it with the part of the ballot initiative on Prop 64. But what we ran into was that it was going to add something like 10 more pages to the initiative, and that people were already, like, it was only 60 pages. So another 10 pages would be a lot there. So what we were really afraid, though, is the voters approved, in order to put it on the ballot, we have to include the entire list of controlled substances. And again, with the word marijuana crossed out, and then renumbering of all these other things. So it's the way that they said they had to do it, although I disagreed. Just to leave a space blank. If the voters passed it and they adopted everything except for marijuana, then it would be much harder to get the other substances out of the Controlled Substances Act. And so we would be inadvertently locking in all these other substances by the will of the voters. And we didn't really want to take a chance on that either. Al?
You got a follow up?
Yeah, Chris. Are you being too complicated? The state of Massachusetts, let me just background, folks. In the United States of America, there are approximately, give or take a few thousand, 550,000 drugs available to you and everybody on this show. 550,000 of them. That's a lot of friggin' drugs. And then you know what? There's cannabis. Excuse me? Cannabis is here and everything else is there. This has always astounded me. So the state of Massachusetts a few years back legalized medical cannabis, and I'm going to paraphrase their law, Chris, but this is what they wrote. They said, if the patient and the primary caregiver decide that cannabis should be used as a medicine, that decision shall be theirs and based on the education, the experience, and the judgment of the physician. Jesus. Wow. Woo. They put cannabis in the same situation as the other 550,000 elements. So my question is, Chris, maybe you're being too complicated?
Well, I think that cannabis has gotten so complicated at this point between the extracts and the different ingestion methods, the different edibles, the way that different cannabinoids are mixed up, phytocannabinoids are mixed into different products and so forth. You're probably right, but at the same time, I just think that the life has a tendency to get more complicated as you go along. Believe me, when we were first talking about legalizing cannabis, and you see what we had with the Jack Herer initiative, was actually, from my point of view, designed to train petitioners and educate the public about cannabis more so than to get on the ballot. We were just preparing a grassroots network to pass some initiative, and then when Prop 215 came along, that network coalesced around that with the veterans and patients and other groups and made it happen. So yeah, I probably am.
Thank you for that and your honesty in that. Next up will be Councilmember Mike Davis. Councilmember Davis.
Hey man, thanks for being here with us. This is awesome. So you've been an expert witness in the courts for decades. So what kind of progress have you seen over the years, if any, inside of the system?
Well, boy, that when I first was involved with this, actually, let me say federally, very little, except that President Biden has been giving blanket pardons and so forth is the main thing. And then the Health and Human Services doing what they did, and what the but in terms of on the state level, I can give you just my direct observations, which was primarily here in California. Although I testified in 11 states and a dozen federal districts and 35 counties in California and 58 different courthouses. I mean, it's like, I've got I'm not just limited to California. But what we saw in California, for example, is that when we passed Proposition 215, it's very restrictive. It said a patient and a caregiver were entitled to have some amount, undescribed, of marijuana for medical purposes if they had a doctor's note. We were able to take that and the federal dosages and the federal the DEA cultivation and yields report that they did there. And as I said, a lot of people may be caught with 6 pounds of marijuana. I think there's a pretty good chance that they were sharing it with other patients, and maybe they were making a little money on the side. I don't know. It wasn't my job to do that. my job was to explain that 6 pounds is a reasonable amount, and this guy had 5 or something along that lines, you know what I mean? And so we were able to, everybody who had more than an ounce or so of cannabis, they would just charge them with sales, because Prop 215 only covered cultivation and possession. But anything else that you did was not covered, and there was very nebulous as to what it meant. And the prosecutors thought it meant don't allow it and bust everybody and let the courts sort it out. And so this is where, relative to what we were talking about with Al, because of the way that the legal definition put forth by Prop 215 gave us this paradigm that we're then able to leverage this to where people who are providing for other patients could argue that the amount was reasonable for them to have. You know, not necessarily without being able to prove completely whether or not they were doing something unlawful. The burden of proof of that was for the prosecution. And in general, they failed miserably because they just made presumptions. As soon as they saw a certain amount of marijuana, they say, okay, well, this is for sales. And then, so we were winning case after case on that. But we didn't have a law saying sales. And so that was able to, how we were able to pressure the legislature to come up with SB 420, which is Vasconcelos's bill. In 2003, it was passed. 2004, it went into effect. And then once that was there, then it allowed patients to sell marijuana to other patients, or it didn't really allow, it gave them a legal defense. And so instead of exactly saying things were legal, it put everything into the courts. And so then we would come in and we would use that same thing. But at that point, you could have it for more than one person. So if you had 5 people that you were providing to, and each of them was reasonable to have 6 pounds for each of them, that justifies you having 30 pounds. And so the state didn't like that formula. And so they came up with the the SB 420 formula, which was 8 ounces per patient. And so under that, if you had 20 patients, you would have, that would protect 10 pounds. But nonetheless, we had created a way of analyzing yields, product, and then compounding that. If a patient would say that they had been eating it or something, then it would make those things compound from there, because the state law allowed for a reasonable amount. And so ultimately, that's what pushed the state legislature to start coming up with licensed medical marijuana stores, is because the law, we were getting it interpreted by the courts, particularly by juries. We were winning a lot at the jury, but we were also doing pretty good at the appeals court. And so that got the state to kind of want to get out in front of it, which is how we ended up with what really became the big problem of California, was MRSA. In 2015, when the legislature came up with the medical rules, because they decided they had law enforcement help them write it, and weren't too concerned about what the people who were actually in the thing were doing. The idea was to give the police a clear line, or they could be busting people, and the people would no longer have a defense. And it took a certain amount of time for it to come into effect, which ended up happening in 2019 when SB 420 went away. And a lot of people blame that. They say, well, Prop 64 got rid of SB 420. That is not correct at all. It was MRSA was in the bill that they passed that said that we were going to lose the collectives. And it was really very unfortunate that the patients, I shouldn't say the patients, a lot of patients supported, these changes along the way. But it's like that when the Senate bill, Proposition 64 was being written, the authors invited input from the activist community. And so, we didn't get a lot of things we wanted, but at least there were about 8 or so that different people, Dale Garinger and so forth, Mickey and I, and other people who put in, or Drug Policy Alliance and so forth. They got the protection of parental rights for marijuana patients, which had been under attack here in California. They added it to the law and so forth. We got a bunch of different little amendments put in that were pretty good. But what the patient community as a single voice kind of said, do not change Prop 215. Don't change the medical marijuana laws. And so the authors of the bill presumed that meant they did not want to touch SB. In fact, they would always say, don't do anything about SB 420. Well, we needed them to authorize and extend SB 420. That's what we needed. But people would say, oh, there's a billionaire behind it, and oh, it's not what we want, and oh, I've got this other initiative I like more, for valid reasons, even perhaps, when they could have had more of an impact on getting changes made into the initiative. I think it was a serious strategic mistake. And so, to the extent that a lot of people, but the next thing that happened, of course, was after we got Prop 64 passed, then Governor Brown immediately had put together a package that became collectively known as Senate Bill 94. And that basically eviscerated the protections of the collectives and the California heritage industry. And that's the key to the whole collapse of what we've seen out here in California since then, because the initiative was written so that there'd be this 5-year window to not exactly grandfather in, but to keep out big out-of-state interests out of the cannabis industry in California for the first 5 years. By limiting the size of the businesses and things like that, by giving special protections to California groups that were already in existence. What happened, though, was that there was some question about whether or not there was a way to get around it in the initiative. And so when they put together SB 94, they went with the idea, well, bigger is better. The fewer companies there are, the easier it is for us to regulate it. So therefore, one of the things that it did, it was eviscerated the protection that was envisioned. And then, of course, then people come back to us and they say, look, you guys promised it was going to be different, or Gavin Newsom promised it was going to be different. It's like, it wasn't supposed to be the way it turned out. That was a deliberate thing done by then Governor Brown, by closing off, by allowing the consolidation of large businesses to come in. And that's, the source of the problem. Also, there's a clause in there that was supposed to require local municipalities to show that they were reducing the amount of illegal marijuana activity in their communities through their policy. And of course, we all know this, there's no legal way to buy marijuana. People are going to buy it illegally. And so therefore, the idea was it would force these communities to to legalize sales and regulate sales, but instead they just opted out around the state, about 75% of them. And so you have the combination of this consolidation and the blocking out of the businesses that happened at the same time. And that was really, it set us back a bit. And then that's how we end up where we are now, I think.
That's a succinct history there. A lot of people are not aware of. Mike, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, it's a pretty important topic, actually, and that's something that is kind of annoying. Is with the farmers that these are discussions that we have sometimes. And what do you think it would take to? Do you think it's lobbying and contacting legislatures to kind of, maybe get these farmers to farm? Is it like the system that's broken? I mean, what do you think that could be done to have the farmers, be legal and sell to dispensaries? Because I know that the paperwork process is so stringent and there's all these rules, and a lot of them, I mean, do you think that there's something that could be done, or is it, I guess that's kind of my question.
It's pretty tricky, because if like you look at the situation up in Oregon, where they basically made it really easy for people to get licenses, businesses, You've got the farmers starving because they're selling it for $25 an ounce from some of the stores. And then you've got somewhere like California where it's so complicated and expensive to get anything going that you need to have deep pockets even to be in the game. And you know, obviously what we need to do is find some sweet spot in between those two. And I'm not exactly sure how we're going to settle on it, because until we have interstate commerce, we're not going to be able to let the market settle out like the markets normally do. And I'm afraid that means that what we're going to see is there will be some big national companies. But I think that when you have some big national companies, that you have room for local businesses to carve out their own niche. When you've got big companies dominating the local market, it's harder for the heritage markets to continue to produce the kind of quality and personally connected cannabis, that was so important to us that we were fighting for all these years, and replacing it with something more commercially produced in most cases. But the thing is that cannabis being a plant, we have so much that we can learn from it. It comes back year after year, and even in when the situations are harsh, some of them survive, and oftentimes, when you read the histories of hemp, how it was used in some cases, because when there was a drought, it was a plant that could still reliably give them fiber, and in floods, because it was a plant that would drink up a lot of water out of the soil and help bring the water content down. And and the way that it's like every aspect of the plant is so giving. It's like the bark is good for giving us this fiber that is the longest, softest natural fiber. You got the seed, the flower, every part of it, even the roots, giving us all benefits and so forth. And so I'm convinced that it's just a longer process than we thought it was going to be, when we look at alcohol prohibition, that was like, almost 90 years ago or whatever now, that was all going on. And, we're not even completely done with legalization here, especially when you see things like what Cory Booker did, which I think was a huge mistake of blocking the banking bill, because he felt it didn't, he needed it to be part of the bigger package and so forth. That was kind of like, as I said, I believe in incremental change. And I think that the more that you make it easier for people to use their human rights to use cannabis, because I think it's a fundamental human right to use this plant for all the different things that people want to use it for. And so, like I say, it's such a surviving plant that I think humanity is once again at some point going to realize how important it is, and there's no greater way to build wealth than to grow it from the soil and to use the labor of the people to turn that into essentially the gold of what the modern economy is, the products and the commerce. And so, and to take care of the basic fundamental needs of the people in ways that it stimulates them to make money and to spend money. And I think that's where the hemp and agriculture economy is really going to show its value at some point soon, is when people realize that, we can't keep spending our money on bringing oil from all around the world and paying whatever price they decide to charge us at the pump this week. And I think that's the way that we're going to have steady growth and to take care of our needs. And I believe that, maybe it's going to be after more at the last minute, you might say, of human endurance for some things that are going on. But I believe that that's going to happen.
Actually, I have good news for you, Chris, because the U.S. Government is going around and telling farmers that they're going to have to produce everything back again, and it's going to be in 60-mile taxation ratios. that anything that's not produced within the 60 miles, outside that 60 miles, is going to be taxed. And it's going all the way to China. And so it's going to see a very soon future proliferation, because I know people right now who are working on diverse, water resistant hemp right now in North Carolina. So there are some, to do with the challenges of the salinization of the East Coast as the waters come inward. So they're working on that type of reality. So there are now incentives and incentive for farmers, and now there's actual incentive for manufacturing. Now we just have to get them out of this cottonization discussion and into using the long fiber like what I'm wearing here, so that we can actually have that infrastructure. So it would also drive farmers to actually produce and visualize what we saw with our hemp jean shirts and the Adidas hemp sneakers, and to see it, proliferate across our entire, clothing options, because it's sadly lacking. And thank you for your education on that, because it was very helpful for me. And your book was one that we also promoted greatly, because it gave everybody an understanding of the entire picture and possibilities of hemp. So again, another nod to you. And we'll go to our final question to our good friend, Michael Krawitz. Councilmember Krawitz.
Thank you, Etienne. So this question, I guess it might seem sort of academic. It might seem sort of a vision question, but for us, it's actually a little bit more practical. Back in 1998, when I went to the UN, I was bringing the voice of the cannabis movement, which was fairly consolidated. If you think about it, we had a very, sort of well-connected, extended movement. And at this point, when we go to the United Nations, it's hard to put a finger on exactly where our movement's at. It's become very, very diversified, both in its scope, but also, with the emergence of cannabis industry that is, more financial driven than human rights driven, etc. So anyway, the question becomes, our cannabis movement is again at a crossroads with the emergence of new cannabis industry, coinciding with an existential moment of both mainstream media and charitable grass tops reform organizations. Unfortunately, the industry's lobbyists have not completely replaced the grassroots / grass tops team of days gone by. How would you see our movement moving forward?
First off, I do agree with the premise that the cannabis movement, as we have known it for so many years, was this whole camaraderie and seeing each other at events, and a lot of it sponsored by just a few groups, like Normal had its events, and DPA, or variations of the Derek Ply Foundation, up through Linda's the PA Today, having their events, and then the Patients Out of Time and so forth. And so it seemed like for the longest time, it was just like the core, the same people that we knew. We saw it at Hemp Fest, we see each other at Harvest Fest, we see each other in the Midwest, all these different places. And so initially, when we started seeing the business interest coming into it, I thought of that as being a pretty positive thing, because again, it was just extending another group of interest into it. But the problem really came in, as you said, is that businesses don't really support social justice movements, and the people who are able to support it have two things. First, they have limits on how much they can put in, and the second thing they have is that how important you are as an issue to them when they think you've already won. And I really think that what we need to do is to start developing more like, and I'm not sure if this is something that can spawn at some point, but like the Cannabis Consumers Union sort of thing of really getting the interest of the people who use it. Because right now we're being overwhelmed by the voices of the people who want to regulate it. And oftentimes, as you said, having a lobbyist that's trying to support the business side of it, I think that in the long term, that's going to make a big difference because business interests are oftentimes they want to expand, so therefore that means we're going to see expansion. But on the other hand, oftentimes they like to interfere with other people, other businesses, and slow things down. So we've certainly seen that throughout history. But as far as whether it's veterans who are using it because of common problems such as PTSD, or whether it's people who are using it for spiritual use, or whether it's people who are going to the dispensaries and buying it and would like to see the whole thing simplified at some point, and more consumption areas and so forth. I think that's still like one of the biggest hangups we have here. In addition to the infrastructure for hemp, is that there's not places for people to hang out. Cannabis was like really the reason our movement, I think, was so successful was because the cannabis has this inherent way of bringing people together to smoke a joint and talking while they're smoking a joint. And so, I think that when we don't have that opportunity anymore, when everyone buys it and goes home and smokes it in front of the TV while they're streaming something, it doesn't build the kind of community that needs to be represented in terms of our interests. And another thing is that we need to somehow see where all of these interests come together, because with people using different things how they like to use it, I don't want to see us limiting our options too much, and say specifically that, there's a lot of edibles, so that I don't like to see the pressure to try to keep people from vaping or smoking, or even if that's pressure against smoking, I don't like to see that go against people who are vaping and so forth. And so we do have these common interests of things that we would like to see. And that's something that I think should be a rallying point. It should be able to build a community. The problem, as my ability to do anything about it, though, is that I don't understand the digital culture experience of social media and how that works, to the point of being able to express it out there. It's like when it was faxes, when it was just basic websites, when it was videos, when it was all these different things up to a certain point, we had ways of getting together. We had Hemp Fest, we had, film showings, we had educational events, we had rallies, we had all these things where we get together to do things. But it seems like somehow having that happen on a social media platform, I really give you guys credit for pursuing that direction, because even if people don't, go into it as much depth as they might otherwise initially, just by virtue of the permanence of the internet, you're creating a story.
Uh-oh, we had a freeze. We had an unfortunate freeze. Let's see if Chris will come back here.
Zoom had too much ice cream.
Right? You eat it too much, you're gonna freeze. All right. Well, with the little lull here, we will hope Chris will pop back. He is answering the final question. It seems we lost him. Let's see if he will pop back in. Unfortunately, we deal with the realities of the interwebs, and I also live in Cocoa County, and it can be iffy depending on where you are and what you're dealing with. So we'll give it here a minute.
That's too bad too. He was the second sexiest guy on the screen, and we lost him.
Right. And we lost you. I guess you're the sexiest guy on the screen, so
Oh,
you know.
hey,
There he
hey.
is. There he is. Okay. He's got the well-trimmed mustache, the whole 9 yards. Yeah. Our poster child, Al Byrne.
Got to have a mustache to be cool.
No,
I don't have a tattoo though. I am clear-skinned Irish boy.
You're
We
one of
don't do tattoos. You want to make something of it? Come on over.
You're some of the few Navy folk that I know that do not have tattoos.
Yeah, well, that's very true. Yeah, that was when I got on my first ship as a midshipman. I was asked after I was on board by 3 or 4 weeks by a couple of the crew members, just shooting the shit. How come you haven't had a tattoo yet, sir? I'm a chicken shit little bastard. That's why. Leave me alone. No, it's actually for an officer to get a tattoo. I think it was true for enlisted men in those years. It was in Article 15. I mean, you're up before the captain. They're gonna do something to you. It's the same thing if you got a sunburn in the Navy. I think it was the same way in the Army. They get you up in front of and they say you took a U.S. soldier out of commission or something, and they fuck with you somehow. It's crazy shit.
They
But anyway, I know. You're tattooed. You got tattoos. You got them on places we don't want to know about. I know.
No. This particular one I did get while I was in the military, and they did threaten me with destruction of government property.
There you go.
Fortunately, I did it the day before I left for combat, so they couldn't necessarily gig me too hard, but it was definitely a sting to say the least. But I kept it healthy, and it survived, and it survived with me. So.
Well, look at what you set the pace, though, Etienne, because now enlisted women officers can wear earrings, huh? And they can have little ones, but they can have their little diamonds and shit, and then they can have hair down to their friggin' ass as long as they tie it up in a ball. Well, if you're a male, try and have hair longer than about a quarter of a friggin' inch, So this inequality is I couldn't stand for it. I'd be looking like this. I'd be on active duty. I'd be doing this shit.
Well, some of our guys who were on active duty and got to actually grow their beards and hair out. I know when my cousin was a SEAL, he had a big fluffy one and lots of long hair.
Well, that's wisdom.
Yes.
Right? No, I mean, over there they consider that's maturity. It's wisdom if you have a beard.
Yes, correct.
Yeah,
that's why they were encouraged. Right. Yeah, that's for sure. Well, it looks like, unfortunately, Chris Conrad has fallen off and has not been able to get back up. But that was our last question. So I want to thank Chris Conrad for joining us this evening. It was an honor, and of course, we definitely got some conversation out of him. We were not lacking in discussion or questions or quality. So thank you all for joining us tonight. I'd like to thank Michael Crowitz, Peggy Jones, Wade Lefter, Al Byrne, Nate Landau, Mike Davis. Myself, I'm Etienne Fontan, and of course, our guest was the venerable Chris Conrad. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us for V.A.C. Roundtable number 67. Chris Conrad. We'll see you in a couple weeks. Thank you, everybody.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and